to option one of her short stories. She surprised me by saying that, that she's been waiting for, something like this, that she has many unoptioned short stories. So she sends me a catalog of many stories, and they are all great, amazing stories. And, left to me, I would like to shoot every single one of them. But the thing about Hello Moto that stood out for me was that I had never read anything like it before. It's just everything about it, the premise, 3 women, supernatural wigs, science and juju merged together to create supernatural wigs. As soon as I read it, I knew what I wanted to do with that. It just stood out in ways that I've never seen in Afrofuturism work or in any kind of science fiction, to be honest. So, that's what appealed to me about it.
There's something you said there that I'm going to come back to, but reading the... Sorry, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Hi. In the film, there was a particular line, there was actually quite a few lines, that struck me, which I actually understand when you say you read the short story and you immediately wanted to turn it into a film. Because when I read it, it's almost actually quite filmic in itself as well. But there was a particular line that Rain says, there is a witchcraft to science and a science to witchcraft, both eventually conspire against you. And I thought it was really beautiful the way that you platformed both juju and science and technology as on the same level, that one didn't take precedent over the other, that they both contained power, and that it felt very much like part of the discord in the film came from trying to marry the two together. And I was just wondering if you could expand upon that, and was that your intention, or what drew you in both the short story and then how you presented it in the film to that interplay between juju and technology?
Well, I'll give a lot of the credit to the author, Nnedi Okorafor. She really gave me a lot of the raw material that you find in the film. That line comes from a short story, and I didn't want to get rid of that line. I wanted that line in the movie because I felt like that line would set the tone, for the entire film, it was the opening line and the closing line as well. So, but the thing I feel about juju and science is, I've always had this feeling, and I'm sort of like an evangelist when it comes to preaching about an alternative, narrative for Africa, because I always wonder, in my head, I think, what would happen if, history didn't happen or didn't occur the way we know it, the way it played out. What if, it happened in another way? So, if you notice, in the film, you see some of the symbols that we had in our ancient traditions and our ancient culture, like the incisive symbols and using cowrie shells and stuff like that, and even with the fashion. But if colonialism, I'll just say, if colonialism didn't happen, and Africa was allowed to progress at its own pace, without, all the stuff that disrupted its development. If Egypt was allowed to be, if Sudan was allowed to be, if the ancient Bini kingdoms were allowed to be, the ancient Igbo tribes were allowed to evolve and become, in their fullest potential, what would be the modern day version of NCBD? What would be the modern day version of our Ankara clothing? What would be the modern day version of all that? If we had, and you see that a lot of artists that are bringing out that to fore through Afrofuturism. And for me, that was the appeal. How do we take those elements and those symbols that we know to be truly African, and just show them in a new, fresh light?
I think you did that really well. I thought for me, there was something about it, the fact that the technology sort of symbolized the new and Juju the traditional, and there was something about how it felt very much like there were Afrofuturist, elements throughout the film, and in its stylings, although it was also clearly set in the now. When the news headlines went across, you saw a couple of news headlines about Boko Haram, so it's not actually set in the future, and that made it feel quite like magic realist, rather than just straight Afrofuturism, which I thought added like a really interesting dimension, where it was at what point in history did we diverge to get to where it was in the film. Now, I don't want to geek out too much, but I did want to ask, actually carrying on in that new and old sort of vein, was about the homages that you made to traditional Nollywood film, because a lot of your shots, there were like Dutch angles in there. There were a lot of your, drone shots. They were very contemporary filming, but at the same time, you also married it with a very classic Nollywood style of much of like the CGI or certain other elements of the film, including the homage in the video shot where she says it's the only thing she actually likes about the country. And I just wanted to ask, really, like segueing to talking about you as a director through the film, like how much of the film shows your sensibility as a director. Like, do you see yourself as just a filmmaker, period, or do you see yourself very much in the tradition and along the projection of a Nigerian and African filmmaker and storyteller? Like, or is that just not something you really think about?
Do I see myself as a Nollywood filmmaker?
No, actually, and I don't really mean Nollywood in a pejorative term at all, but I mean, often what you sometimes find is that, and what I found with some contemporary Nollywood films or films coming from Nigeria, is that to get acclaim, they've basically made films that look like they were made in Hollywood. However, your film doesn't do that, yet it's still very contemporary. And yeah, so I was just wondering, is that something that you've done consciously, or is that just your artistic sensibility?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. An interesting thing happened when I was flying into London at the immigration. The officer asked me, business or pleasure? So I said a little bit of both. And he says, what's the business part? And I said, well, I'm a filmmaker. And he goes, I hope you don't make Nollywood films. It's really funny. Oh, it's funny. The thing is, I think I try not to. I think the word Nollywood is problematic. To begin with, because of where it came from. If you know the history of it, I think some journalists from the New Yorker or New York Times, one of them, came to Nigeria, saw a bunch of guys making films for 10,000 naira. They shoot for a week, and they never rehearse. They shoot everything indoors. All that stuff. And he goes, this is nice, this is cute. I'll call it Nollywood, and it's stuck, it's stuck. So, Nollywood is a certain kind of film, it's a certain kind of film, and it has a particular aesthetic, and it caters to a certain audience, and it's stylistically, it has a format, right? So that aside, it should exist because there's an audience for it. There's an audience for it, and it should exist. My problem is when the entire filmmaking that comes out from Nigeria is defined as Nollywood. That's where I have a problem, because you don't define every single filmmaking from America as Hollywood. You don't define every single filmmaking from India as Bollywood, you know. So it shouldn't be any different from Nigeria. It's a country with over 200 million people, and one genre, you know, can cater to an audience of, you know, hundreds of millions of people. You know, there are different ways to tell stories, and I just feel like as a genre filmmaker, specifically for where I come from, I like to think I'm a student of film, of cinema, and I love film and I love cinema. So if I'm making film, I'm making film from a place of love. I just want to, you know, it comes from a place of love, you know, for love for film as an art form, as a craft. So, but there is no hate whatsoever for Nollywood, which is why there's a homage for it, because I feel like it has its place in the scheme of things as far as Nigerian filmmaking is concerned. My only issue is when other kinds of stories are not allowed to exist. You know, I think that's unhealthy.
Yeah. I think that is a very good point in terms of, I think sometimes it's indicative of the fact that not enough African and Nigerian, but just African in general, films get exposed to the quote-unquote West, so we all feel that it's in that certain vein of filmmaking. With that, I actually just wanted to also talk about identity in it, in the film as well. So I found it interesting that the things that gave them power were wigs, and they seem to symbolize two things, both the wig as a crown, but also the idea of transformation. And there was that line where it said that you start to forget yourself, that with the wigs they start to forget themselves. And it was that idea of wearing power, and that the way a wig, but also just power, can change one's identity. And considering in the larger context of the film, in terms of, as you mentioned, colonialism, is that something that you're leading the audience towards to consider, as in like the identity of us as individuals as we move through the world and try and gain, you know, money, power, riches and such, but also the identity of a culture, a nation, a continent? Is that something that you were trying to communicate in the film?
Well, what I wanted to communicate, well, first of all, there was a message for me, you know, when I read the story. On the surface, you have the very obvious, which is, you know, black women and their hair. I grew up with black women, so I know what that's like. You know, all that banging on the hair and all that stuff. So when I read that stuff, you know, in the story, I wanted to see that, because that's just something you don't see. You know, usually when black women are represented on the screen, you know, they're either a caricature or they're like really this pristine, idealistic, you know, beauty, you know, with the perfect hair, and, you know, just always on makeup and everything, just perfect and right. So when I read this story, just was a breath of fresh air, because it felt really grounded, but at the same time, you know, aspiring to something, to a higher ideal, you know, which is really special for me. So I wanted to see that on screen. Now that was the first thing. And then the second thing was, I liked the idea that you could take something as simple as hair, but then it becomes the symbol of something even bigger, you know, like, power, you know, like unquenchable thirst for power, something that sucks out everything that is good and light in you, and it becomes a monster, something that's just trivial as hair becomes, you know, a monster in itself. You know, I liked that idea because it played on some of like the political subtext of what I think is Nigeria, you know, in the sense that, you know, you look at a country that has pretty much, a lot of things going for it, like oil and stuff like that. But then those same things are the same things that are destroying the country. So I looked at it in a very allegorical way. I don't know if I was able to translate that to visual, but that was what I was trying to communicate, and one of the things that I did was to shoot the final scene at the National Theatre, which for me was also a symbol in itself, because if you know anything about that, you know that National Theatre was built in '77 when at the height of Nigeria's artistic achievement, which was the FESTAC, the Festival of Theatre and Arts. It was the height of Nigeria's artistic accomplishment. So, but the National Theatre now is pretty much like a dead zone. That building, there's nothing going on there. So for me, it was also like an allegory on what how artistry is dead, in the country. So it was about just putting all those symbols in place and just trying as much as possible to find ways to communicate, certain ideas.
That's really interesting. I think allegory is the right way to describe the context of the film. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to throw it out to the audience. So if you guys want to get any of your questions ready. So the last thing I want to ask, actually continuing on from that point, was there was a part in the film where they go on a 3-day trip to Paris, a 2-day trip to Paris, and she mentions that that they all have the ability to travel out of Nigeria at will, but only for a few days. And that struck me because it felt like, was it an allegory basically for the pull of home? Like, despite one's ability, power, or the accessibility of travel, which often only comes to the powerful to an extent, or the privileged, and that combined with almost a self-hatred of the things around you, but they still had that pull, rather than just leaving and living somewhere else without causing mayhem. They still had that sort of that pull for home, that they can only ever be away for a few days.
Well, that's kind of like how I saw it, but the idea for me is that, like the wigs, they were created in the country, so, the engine, so to speak, is in the country. So the farther away you are, you can only, that's like in my head, of course. So like the farther away you are from it, the more the power wanes. So you can only stay, but not for too long, stay away but not for too long. Then you have to, get back, recharge. Like those are some of the subtext that are not really visible, but like if it was to be made into like a feature film, those are like some of the ideas that would be more fleshed out.
Thank you. So now I just want to ask, does anyone have any questions in the audience? We have one over here.
Hi, my name's Obi. I just wanted to ask a question about your journey to finance. Was it easy? Was it hard? You don't necessarily have to give us figures, but just wanted to find out that road for you. And do you find that this whole Black is back from the world of Black Panther and Black Lightning, and has that helped you as well, or is that kind of, how's that affected your journey?
Let me try to answer that in 2 parts. I grew up on comics, so Black Panther has been my thing since at least 91, 92. So always been. And the thing that always stood out for me about Black Panther, I love the other stuff, the X-Men, the Superman, all that other stuff. But Black Panther, he was a guy who looked like me even as a kid. So that for me was always special. And to be honest, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker ever since as far back as I can remember. And my dream job would have been to make a Black Panther movie. That would have been my dream job. but that Kugler beat me too. So, but yeah, I've always wanted to do that. But science fiction fantasy is so expensive. It's to really do it, it's so expensive. So you have to find the right angle, to really pull it off. Especially if you're a filmmaker in Nigeria, you have to find like an angle that works. And even with my other projects, I never went anywhere near science fiction or fantasy, even though like that's like my favorite thing. I dabbled in other genre stuff, but I think also the other thing with being a filmmaker is sometimes you're sensitive to when it's the right time to do something. And honestly, I knew Black Panther was in development when I reached out to Neddy, but I was just looking out for myself, to be honest. I just wanted to really do something of hers, and her willingness and eagerness to give me that option. That was like in, I think, early 2017, when, she put me through with that agency and stuff, and we worked out an option. As soon as we got the option, she made the announcement that her book, Who Fears Death, had been optioned by HBO, being adapted by, George R.R. Martin. And then all the other stuff, and then, much later on, Black Panther came out. All that happened like way after, but I was already like trying to get the option before that. And, sorry, what deviated again?
Do you think you've benefited from the Black is Back?
I think I have. I think there's a wave, but it's also like a healthy wave, if you think about it, because, if you really think about it, like we've had like 100 years of misrepresentation of Black people, of Africans, by people who are not us, So, why not own the next 100 years? If you can, why not? So if it's a wave, it's a Black is Back, whatever, I think it's a good thing. As long as it comes from a place of love and, you really have something to say about the Black experience, about being Black, about being African in a way that really pushes the genre work and genre filmmaking and makes people really see, Africa in a different light. I think, it's worth it.
I know we had another question just up there, and then right at the top.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for your film. Like you said, it's good seeing something that's different from Nollywood and not about evil stepmoms, people trying to take people's husbands and poison them. So thank you for that. I had a question about incivity, because I found out about it quite recently, and you use it in the film. Did you do research on it? And were the characters you saw on the mobile phone, were they actual incivity characters with meanings, or did you just kind of copy whatever looked nice for production design? I'm just curious about that.
A little bit of both. Obviously, I know every symbol that was used in the film. I know what it means. I looked it up, but I was also looking for aesthetic as well. How it would work with the just visuals. How it would look. So if this one had a meaning that was closer to the story, but it didn't look nice, I would find something else that was closer for the visuals, because most people, would want to be hit with the symbolism, and the symbolism would supersede the meaning, because I think the true meaning is that these things existed, and we communicated at that level, and this was before the industrial age, this was before the Iron Age, we were communicating at that level, and it's an idea of what would be the modern day version of that. If we had our own technology, like Wakanda, if we had our own technology and we were able to bring all those ideas and metric systems and cultures and stuff into modern day technology, how would that translate? I mean, it means we can hack the system with incisive. It means we can use it to create software and it just makes you think the possibilities.
That's interesting. When I saw those symbols, I just wrote a note down that said technoglyphics. Because I didn't actually know that it was, I know we had a question here and a question there. If we can maybe, if we take either one. Okay.
Hi, thank you very much for that film. So you mentioned you're not very comfortable with the blanket term Nollywood encompassing everything that comes out of Nigeria, but you mentioned that it very much has an audience and has its place. But how do you feel about what's the audience in Nigeria like for this kind of work right now, and how is that changing, and where do you see that going?
The audience in Nigeria for this kind of work? Well, it's hard to say because, as I like to call them, the gatekeepers in Nigeria won't allow the audience to experience, things like this, or genre work, just genre work in general. So it's hard to gauge, but I like to think, I'm an optimistic guy, so I like to think that they will be open to it. I mean, Nigerians love Game of Thrones, we love The Walking Dead, we love, all that stuff. So, if we can make not versions, but like stories that are genre, like fantasy, science fiction, but that speaks to us, and it's done, decently enough, I think people will embrace it. But, it has to come from, the only way you can get to the people is, if the powers that be allow it to happen, otherwise, I'll still be doing festivals and, stuff like that. And you can't really get to anyone, unfortunately.
Actually, talk about before you said that Ryan Coogler beat you to the punch on Black Panther. So Marlon James, who wrote A Brief History of Seven Killings, he's actually currently writing the first in a trilogy of what is being billed as the African Game of Thrones, which I'm really looking forward to. So it's coming out in 2019, as long as he can finish it. So you never know. If that's good, maybe that can be your first sort of like TV series, long form project.
Is writing it?
Yeah, Marlon James. So he won the Man Booker Prize for A Brief History of Seven Killings.
What's it called?
What's the book called? The title hasn't been released yet, but it's going to be a trilogy. We had a question here.
I'd just like to say I really loved that. I thought it was fantastic, and I think it should have had the funding to be a feature. I thought it was brilliant. I felt like the way that you wove the different narratives from ancient to present to future were beautifully, seamlessly sewn together into one narrative that was so potent and really visual and wonderful. To me, it felt like Le Mépris by Jean-Luc Godard, that kind of ancient and the present and the future all together. I'd like to know who your greatest influences are and what you draw from visually and for your filmmaking.
Can I get back to you? I don't know who my greatest influence. At some point, I think everybody has a Quentin Tarantino stage. And then at some point you have a Scorsese stage. But now I can't really say because, if anything, I'm more influenced by. If anything, like I would say, I'm leaning more now towards. The old guys from, Senegal and Burkina Faso, if anything, because I'm trying to find, because they could really talk to their people, you know, they knew how to like really speak to, and that's really what I'm interested in, you know, to speak in a universal way, but in a way that you know, an African will see and it really speaks to them, but it has a global language, and that's, for me, it's the height of cinema, you know, when cinema is pure, it's so pure that it can speak to a specific people, but everybody understands it, you know. So, I mean, I like all those guys, Truffaut, all those guys, Godin, I like them, you know. An interesting thing, he was reading my bio. We formed a collective called Surreal 16, and we were huge fans of what the guys did at Dogma 95, and we feel like Nigeria has come of age where we need such a disruption, you know, in Nigeria in terms of the cinema. There's just, you know, one kind of filmmaking. So, you know, the three of us, we came together and we formed Surreal 16 to sort of like confront some of these dated, you know, ways of telling stories, and some of it. We have a manifesto. Some of it is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, it's kind of like a way of saying, you know, don't do this, don't do that, because, you know, it's been overdone. It's boring. It's old. There are new ways. There are new possibilities. You know, let's push for that. Let's really push for that. And you know, the new wave guys before God, they did all that, and you know, their country is better for it. Dogma 95 did that. Their country is better for it. Zotrop did that. American cinema is better for it. You know, why shouldn't we have that in Nigeria? You know, it's just how I feel.
I'm going to take one more question, but I also just wanted to follow that on based on that question and the one before about the international reception to your work. If there are gatekeepers, so work like this can't be shown in Nigeria, it'd be interesting just to hear a little bit about how it's received abroad, and if you feel that the deeper contexts of the work, or the messages, or the themes that you're trying to get across, are you able to in an international context?
Oh yeah, some of the, like, it's sad for me because, like, with my first work with Juju, when we made Juju, like, most of the reaction we got from people who didn't even allow it to, you know, circulate was, you know, he's making a Nigerian Walking Dead, or he's trying to do a Resident Evil, you know, like, and if you really think about it, like, zombies actually sort of like have their origins from Africa, the concept at least, you know, like it's even in our culture, and the slaves took it to Haiti, you know, with the voodoo and how, you know, they reenact, remember their dead loved ones and stuff like that. I reenact in those ceremonies of the undead. And though we still have some of those things in African culture, in West African culture, in Benin and all that. So, like, those, when you think about all these things, and you realize that filmmaking hasn't really matured to the point in Nigeria where you can take ideas, right, and put it out there, and people who have the power to distribute or to, you know, give platforms to short films, you know, immediately get what you're trying to do and allow those things to thrive. You know, we're not at that point yet. We're unfortunately, that's the sad thing for me. There's an audience who is hungry for such content. I really hate to use the word content, but, you know, there's a lot of people who want to see that stuff, you know, but unfortunately they can't. So, yeah, I mean, like, it's sad, but I've had some of the best reception for my work outside Nigeria, you know. I mean, what are you going to do? It is what it is. You can't discriminate an audience. The most important thing is people see the work at the end of the day.
Okay, so final question. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks. My question is basically reacting reacting to your comments on globalization, which was already mentioned, and I guess the idea of African narratives that speak to your audience and your desire to want to speak to your audience. And I guess for me, I'm quite curious because the idea of globalization always, globalization in regards to Africa, I always think about Africa being quite outward facing and always looking to, I guess there's a perception of Africa always looking to other ideals outside of their own. So I think my main question is if you think it's possible to have an African narrative that isn't always responding to the past, basically, the ideas of colonialization and aspiring to Western representation, which I think, personally for me, I see a lot in African films. And I just wonder if you think it's possible to have a genre that isn't always reacting to that, or isn't so set or so hooked on reacting to that.
Sorry, reacting to what?
Ideas of colonialization.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think that. I think, well, it's one thing to look at Afrofuturism as a reaction, right? It's another thing to look at it as an expression. I think I like to look at it as an expression. It's not angry art, you know. It's not you know, throwing paint on a mat or something. It's us looking back to look forward. You know, it's you want to do that because just think about this. You know, psychologically, we've never had up until Black Panther happened. We've never had that. You know, like, I mean, it's so easy to trivialize it, but if you really think about the weight of that, it took that long for that to happen on screen. And, you know, the thing is, people don't realize it, but, you know, there's a psychological effect of that sort of like plays, it's a deep-seated thing. But if you see, I'll give you an example, like in the 60s, right? The Americans landed on the moon. And the kids, some of the kids who saw that, you know, wanted to be, you know, astronauts, right? And even if they couldn't, maybe they had great soccer or whatever, they couldn't be astronauts, but, you know, they aspired to do great things, right? It inspires you, right? So it's the same thing with everything in pop culture. If we've been having representations on screen that show us, you know, in space, you know, or you know, on screen, playing lead characters that are not, you know, some Uncle Sam, whatever, caricature, you know, think about how that would influence the next generation. You know, so like that's how I really like to see all these things. I think it's important that we, you know, just like sort of like think deeper about the kind of material we create as African storytellers, filmmakers, artists, writers, and just sort of like find a way to push the black race forward, just a little step forward. Because I mean, we're really coming to the party late. We are.
That actually reminds me. Say that it's terrible, but I can't remember the writer who said it. But in both film and just novelistic fiction, in mainstream sci-fi, they have some of the lowest representation of people of colour, and it often feels for young people of colour who read this that we are being in imagined futures, we're being thought out of them, because whether it's, you know, if you've grown up with Star Wars, you know, you had Lando Calrissian who dies pretty early in it. Star Trek, the only person of colour in the original one was basically always wore the red jersey, so that they died first on any landing party. And there was a black woman, Uhuru, who was the first interracial kiss on American TV, but she was basically made valid because a white man was interested in her. And there is, I understand what you're saying, because it does seem like in visions of the future, if you don't also envision people of colour.
Sorry to cut you off, because subliminally, it makes you think that you don't belong.
Yeah.
You know, and you pass that on. People don't realize it, but you pass it on to your children. You know, if you feel a certain type of way and you don't aspire to things, you're going to pass it on to your kids. If you do great things, if you're the kind of person who really aspires, even if you fail woefully at your aspirations, your kids will be inspired to try and succeed where you fail. But if you never aspire to anything, your kids will never aspire to anything, unless they really break away, and that's difficult. But that's really what we're trying to do now, break away from, you know, that system of just being zombified. You know, the connotations are so deep. You know, it goes into the fabric of even how the black man thinks today. You know, how the black man thinks. And for me personally, like, you know, growing up in Nigeria, you sort of like, you have some, you know, sort of like pride. But even that is being attacked right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not what it used to be. You being Nigerian, you know, because of, you know, all the stuff going on. And that affects even like Nigerians, I'm sure Nigerians who live here in London understand what I'm talking about. So all these things, they build up in your mind and they form struggles. And if you don't take time, you pass it on to your kids. And that's how the cycle continues. So until we start making conscious decisions and efforts, like very specific choices in our storytelling, you know, it will never really change.
Well, I'm glad you're here doing that, and I think that's a wonderful note to end on. If everyone can please join me in giving warm thanks to C.J.